30 years ago, a 9-year-old girl in Temple, Texas, vanished without a trace after simply running inside to grab her purple jacket, leaving her family and community plunged into unspeakable horror with no resolution. Authorities suspected a man living near the industrial area was involved, but with no body found, no clear witnesses, and very few leads to pursue, the investigation stalled for decades. Yet through all those years, Heather's mother never gave up hope, clinging to the slim possibility that her daughter was still out there somewhere and that the truth would one day come to light. Then one day, when the cold case unit revisited the old files, they uncovered a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked, a clue that could change the entire direction of the investigation and shock everyone involved. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. In late April 1993, the sky over Temple, Texas, was covered in a pale gray layer of clouds, dulling the afternoon light like a fine mist, while damp spring winds blew through the quiet neighborhood on the south side of town. Along the row of modest homes lining the oak-shaded street, old pickup trucks and sedans sat silently by the curb, and from a nearby garage came the steady whine of a metal grinder, a familiar background sound for the families who had lived in this area for years. In the Whitmore's backyard, the light, crystalline sound of children laughing rang out. 9-year-old Heather Whitmore, her hair in a high ponytail and her sneakers worn from use, ran around with 2 neighborhood kids, as happy as on any other afternoon. Nothing in that scene foreshadowed that the town was about to experience one of the longest and strangest days in its collective memory. When a sudden cold gust slipped through the wooden fence, scattering a few lingering cherry blossoms and making Heather shiver, she turned to her friends and said she'd run inside to get her purple jacket. An utterly ordinary action that no one in the yard paid much attention to. Kids were constantly running in and out, and in neighborhoods like this, no one thought twice about it. But that piece right after Heather disappeared around the corner of the house lasted one beat too long. The sounds of play gradually died down as Heather's friends waited, at first relaxed, then starting to glance at each other in confusion. One of them called toward the back door, "Heather, you done?" No answer. Heather's mother stepped out, her hands still dusted with flour, calling for her daughter in an even tone. But when the wind answered only with an unreasonably prolonged silence, her expression shifted to tension. She stepped down the porch, scanned the yard, looked over at the neighbors' houses, and called her name again, this time louder and more sharply. Still nothing. The silence began to spread like a shadow over the little house. No running footsteps, no door opening, no laughter echoing from the garden corner. Only the wind, and a sudden inexplicable disconnection. The family and neighbors fanned out, searching every edge of the yard, every stone path, every patch of ground behind the fences. No trace, no belongings, no sign that Heather had just passed through. The bewilderment quickly turned into thick tension, that feeling parents usually experience only once in their lives, when instinct overrides reason and screams that something is very wrong. Heather's mother went back inside, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the phone, and with ragged breaths, she dialed the police, the first moment she fully understood that this was unlike any time before. Less than 10 minutes after the call, the first Temple Police Department patrol car turned onto the narrow street leading to the Whitmore home. The yellow lights on its roof spun slowly, not loudly, but enough to make the usually quiet neighborhood feel constricted. Officer Caldwell was the first to step out, walking quickly toward the back door where Mrs. Whitmore waited, with barely contained panic in her eyes. Caldwell had handled plenty of calls about missing kids, ones who'd wandered to a friend's house or the nearby park, but something in the air this time made him sense the difference. It wasn't loud panic, it was a thick silence, the kind he'd been warned about in training. If parents don't hear their child for a few minutes, that's not silence, that's a signal. Caldwell followed Mrs. Whitmore around the backyard, then out to the street edge. No clear footprints, no dropped items, no sounds from the neighboring yards. Everything was too clean, too undisturbed, as if Heather had simply been erased from the scene without leaving a single movement behind. When 2 more officers arrived, they immediately set up an initial search radius around the Whitmore home. They followed the circle sweep pattern, expanding from the backyard to the fence, to the next house, then along the driveway to the main road. The officers knocked on every door, asking the same question, "Did you see a little girl run past here?" But the answers all shared one thing: "I think so, but I'm not sure when." A middle-aged woman said she'd seen Heather run across the side lawn a few minutes ago, but she couldn't remember exactly which direction the girl went. A man washing his car insisted he'd heard children's laughter, but couldn't confirm it was Heather's or the other kids in the area. An 11-year-old boy was certain he'd seen Heather head toward the main road, but when asked again, he changed his story. Or maybe toward the back door. "I don't remember." Those initial statements, which should have formed the basis for an accurate timeline, were so vague that Caldwell noted in his book, "Inconsistent, unable to establish direction of movement." That was what bothered him. Normally, in typical missing child cases, neighbors were certain about what they'd seen. But here, despite the bright afternoon and the small neighborhood, no one could clearly say where Heather had disappeared along the less than 30-meter path from the backyard to the house door. After an initial sweep lasting more than 20 minutes, only one thing was confirmed: no one saw Heather come back out after she went inside. No one heard screaming. No items were dropped. No signs of a struggle or a door forced open. Caldwell bent down to check the ground right under the back door a second time. Normally, kids running in and out would leave footprints, even faint ones, but the ground was completely smooth, undisturbed beyond the marks already there from earlier. It gave him the feeling that she never stepped out of here, a feeling that contradicted the fact that Heather had clearly left the yard minutes before. When the second police team arrived, the shift lieutenant asked Caldwell, "What do you think?" "Just a kid who went to a friend's house." Caldwell shook his head. He couldn't fully explain it, but something didn't add up. The time Heather left the yard was too short for her to have gone far enough to be unfound. The statements were inconsistent, despite everyone being so close, and especially the silence. That silence wasn't the quiet of a peaceful neighborhood. It was the void created by something unusual, fast and precise. As the sky began to darken, the lieutenant decided to escalate the case. The protocol was activated over the radio. "Initiate missing child protocol, level 1. The officers present said nothing more, but everyone understood what that meant. From this point on, Heather was no longer simply considered a lost child. This had officially become a missing person case. Once the missing child protocol was activated, Temple PD immediately deployed more personnel, and within 20 minutes, the neighborhood around the Whitmore home was filled with sweeping patrol lights along the sidewalks, and the crackle of radios in the cooling air. Caldwell directed the search teams to expand the radius, starting with areas a child could reach in a few minutes. The backyard, the side paths, the ground near the fences, the large bushes nearby. Everyone moved methodically, leaving no corner unchecked. Flashlights swept over every patch of ground, flipping over dry branches and misplaced leaves. Other officers used long sticks to probe along the ditches to ensure no small item had fallen where the naked eye might miss it. Still, what they were looking for, a sign that Heather had passed this way, never appeared. No shoes, no hair tie, no scrap of paper, no small item a child might carry. This unsettled Caldwell more than the earlier silence. From experience, kids running fast or carelessly usually drop something, at least leaving clear footprints, especially on the soft ground near the fence. But the ground was too pristine. There was no disturbance indicating Heather had returned to the backyard after leaving her friends. Notably, even the older footprints from previous play sessions didn't help. It was hard to distinguish new from old, making it nearly impossible to reconstruct her movement. A young officer, Danielson, spotted some small footprints near the row of trees on the east side of the backyard, but when the team leader checked, they saw the prints were broken up, some pointing toward the house, some toward the road, and overlapped by other children's prints from the neighborhood. It was impossible to conclude which belonged to Heather that afternoon. Danielson shook his head at Caldwell and said quietly, "No clear direction of movement. It's like she just stopped existing here." The comment sounded emotional, but accurately described the scene: no starting point, no ending point, no continuous sequence of actions to follow. They expanded the search to the neighbors' backyards. The lots there were larger, with several back doors opening onto shared rear areas. Officers walked in a line, shining flashlights under porches, checking trash cans, bushes, and low overhangs that could hide a child's small item. But nothing appeared. The strangeness wasn't in not finding Heather, it was in not finding anything related to her. No scrap of clothing, no candy wrapper, no mini notebook, no toy she usually carried, no sign she ran hurriedly, fell or changed direction. Caldwell wrote in his notebook, "Zero trace along expected route." In missing child investigations, this is one of the rarest and most alarming types of reports. As the search teams moved farther out, they checked the wooden fence in the back, where small gaps sometimes let kids slip through to the next yard. But the dirt right under the gap showed no fresh scratches, no bent grass blades, no compressed soil from a small foot. The side gate also showed no signs of recent opening. The thin layer of dust on the hinges was intact, not fallen as it would from the gate swinging. Everything pointed to a truth. Caldwell didn't want to voice Heather's path left no chain of movement. That only happens in two scenarios. Either she moved in an extremely narrow, precise way that left no trace, nearly impossible for a 9-year-old, or she didn't move on her own. Time passed, and the air grew thicker. The gentle spring wind now carried an indescribable chill, not from the weather, but from the unease creeping into every officer. The flashlight beams created long streaks on the pavement, while the steady footsteps of the search team contrasted sharply with the emptiness of the scene. At the end of the block, a group of officers expanded the search toward the main road. If Heather had headed this way, she could have crossed the lawn and reached the small convenience store a few blocks away. But again, no sign she had passed through that afternoon. No one saw her on the road. No store owners remembered her walking by. A mailbox left slightly open was checked and deemed unrelated. As the search teams regrouped for a final sweep of the outer circle, the commander said what everyone already understood: no trace, no direction. That means two possibilities. She left the area faster than expected. He paused, emphasizing each word, or someone took her without leaving a single mistake. Both possibilities weighed heavily on the air. No one spoke, but their investigative instincts told them this disappearance didn't look like a typical lost child case. It was cleaner than normal, abnormally clean, and that very abnormality was the first thing that made Temple PD realize the case before them wouldn't just be a few-hour search. This could be the start of a file no one in the neighborhood wanted to face. Night had fully fallen when the search teams returned to gather in the Whitmore's front yard to report the situation. No trace, no belongings, no direction of movement. Everything felt like a closed loop that left everyone heavy-hearted. But just as Temple PD prepared to expand the search to the next neighborhood, an officer's radio crackled with an urgent call. "We've got something. Possible belonging." Caldwell immediately jumped in his car and headed to the location. The focus was a stretch of sidewalk about 4 blocks from the Whitmore home, a distance not too far, but enough to raise many questions. A woman living in the area had called the hotline after spotting a child's backpack leaning against the base of a traffic sign pole. She said she recognized it because she'd seen Heather carrying a similar one on school mornings. When Caldwell arrived, Officer Danielson was already standing guard, gloved and keeping everyone back. The pink backpack sat under the pale yellow streetlight, looking almost too pristine for something left on a sidewalk. No scuff marks from the ground, no water stains from the light evening drizzle, no mud despite the thick dust in the area from nearby construction. Caldwell crouched to examine it closely before allowing the forensics team to approach. He didn't touch it, just looked slowly from the zipper to the straps to the bottom. Everything was inexplicably clean. For a 9-year-old playing outside, the backpack should have had dust or grass stains or scratches, but this one didn't, as if it had been placed there rather than dropped. One officer whispered, "Doesn't look like a kid dropped it, looks more like someone set it down." When the forensics team arrived, they immediately photographed it from multiple angles, noting air movement to avoid contaminating evidence. Under the flashlight beams, Caldwell noticed a faint gray dust on the stitching at the bottom of the backpack. He ordered it sampled right away. The forensics tech gently scraped the dust into a vial and said quietly, "Looks like limestone, but not sure." What made this notable was that the area around where the backpack was found had no limestone sources. The ground here was mostly red clay and asphalt dust. Limestone was more common in the industrial area north of Temple, several miles away. Caldwell scanned the sidewalk again, trying to connect the backpack to the location. No stonework, no material trucks parked nearby. Another officer suggested, maybe the dust came from the backyard at the kid's house, but Caldwell shook his head. He'd swept the area around the Whitmore home earlier. No such dust there. This led to a dangerous thought in his mind. The backpack hadn't been with Heather when she vanished. It had been somewhere else before being placed here. As forensics continued documenting every detail, one of them spotted something else strange. Stuck near the backpack zipper was a small piece of dark blue fabric fiber, less than a centimeter long but visible under the light. The fiber was distinctive, not like children's clothing fabric, not like regular upholstery. The tech removed it with sterile tweezers, placed it in an evidence bag, and labeled it sample #14, fiber. They had no way yet of knowing its origin, but its presence on an otherwise clean backpack was a detail that couldn't be ignored. Caldwell stood there a long time, watching the backpack being carefully sealed. He tried to reconstruct the afternoon. Heather runs inside for a jacket, no one sees her come out. The family searches the area minutes later, finds no sign. And now the backpack, which Heather wasn't carrying while playing outside, appears 4 blocks away, too clean, with limestone dust from elsewhere, and a strange fiber. He wrote in his notebook, "Scene of recovery inconsistent with expected path," meaning, the place the backpack was found wasn't where Heather dropped it. It was placed there, and if the backpack was placed there, the point where Heather vanished, and where the backpack appeared were likely not the same. A young officer asked Caldwell, "Do you think she walked this far?" Caldwell didn't answer right away. He looked down the long road, at the connected streetlights and the darkness between them. After a few seconds, he replied, "If she walked, the backpack would be dirty. If someone drove her, the backpack would have been in the vehicle. But it shows up here, clean, no drag marks. I think." He stopped mid-sentence, not wanting to say it yet, but the thought was stuck in his head. The real scene isn't here. It might not even have been near the Whitmore home. After the backpack was collected, and the scene marked off, Caldwell stepped back, looking at the quiet neighborhood under the dim lights. Something was wrong, not just a little wrong, but wrong from the root. Typical child abductions leave chaotic traces, dropped items, footprints, screams, erratic paths, but here, everything was clean to the point of chilling. The shift commander approached and asked, "What's your conclusion?" Caldwell pocketed his pen and said slowly, "I think we're standing where someone wanted us to stand, not where it all started," and that was the first moment Temple PD realized, the scene they were seeing wasn't the real scene. This wasn't a simple lost child case. This was a deliberate disappearance, staged. In the gentle darkness of the street, the pink backpack was quieter than any witness statement. It spoke without sound. Heather didn't leave on her own, and someone brought it here to mislead them. The original abduction point was somewhere else, and they hadn't found it yet. When the backpack was taken to the evidence room and the surrounding area temporarily sealed off again, Temple PD moved to the next step, reconstructing the afternoon's timeline. This is always the backbone of any missing child case. The more precisely each minute and each direction of movement can be determined, the higher the chances of finding the victim. But as soon as Caldwell started working on it, he realized what he had vaguely sensed all along. The timeline was contradicting itself. The seemingly simple statements were creating 2 completely different pictures. Caldwell and Officer Danielson went back to each neighboring house, trying to collect accounts from residents while the streetlights were on, but it wasn't too late for people to cooperate. The first person they spoke to was Mrs. Hudson, who lived across from the Whitmores. She insisted she had seen Heather run out to the edge of the street, like she was about to cross. But when Caldwell asked her the exact time, She hesitated.
Around
when I was watering the flowers. Maybe, close to 5. Caldwell knew this didn't help much. Close to 5 could be 4:45 or 5:10. More importantly, running from the Whitmore's backyard to the street edge meant Heather had left her friends in a completely different direction from what they had initially recorded. At the next house, Mr. Bertram told a completely different story. He said he saw Heather heading toward his back door, like she was coming back to play. He was very certain. The kid went in. I even heard the door. I think. Caldwell asked again, then a third time. Each time Mr. Bertram stuck to his conclusion, but the detail about hearing the door changed. Sometimes he said he heard it clearly, sometimes it was just a feeling. At another house, the young man washing his car insisted, I saw the girl run across the lawn and disappear behind the fence. Caldwell put his hand to his forehead. That was yet another direction, this time toward the lot behind the garage. But when asked if he saw her come back out, he replied, no, but I'm not sure it was her. I just saw a small figure run by. Bailey, a mother of 2 who lived 3 houses down, said she had seen a child in a bright-colored shirt near the Whitmore's driveway. But when Caldwell asked if she was sure it was Heather, she answered, maybe, but it could have been one of the grandkids next door. The statements weren't malicious, weren't trying to hide anything. They were simply human, mistaken, inaccurate, vague. But in a child disappearance, vagueness equals danger. Caldwell opened his notebook and wrote a short line. Eyewitnesses create conflicting vectors. Those vectors, the different directions of movement, couldn't exist at the same time. Heather couldn't run to the street edge, head back to the yard, cross the lawn, and disappear behind the fence in the same time frame described. One of the statements was wrong. Maybe all of them were wrong. And more dangerously, this very inconsistency was distorting the timeline in a way that prevented police from determining where Heather was truly last seen. In the Whitmore's living room, a map of the neighborhood was spread out. Caldwell marked each statement with dots and small arrows. After 10 minutes, the map looked like a tangled web that couldn't be unraveled. Danielson looked at the map and said, it's like she was in 3 places at once. Caldwell nodded. It's not that she was moving unpredictably. It's that people's eyes got it wrong. But that explanation didn't help clarify the problem. Wrong how, and more importantly, why were they all wrong in opposing directions? He began analyzing each statement by factors like lighting, distance, obstructions, and the witness's daily habits. Each person had a reason to be mistaken. Mrs. Hudson usually wore reading glasses, but took them off while watering plants. Mr. Bertram always had the TV on loud, which could cause auditory illusions. The young man washing the car was looking from a low angle, with light reflecting off the water, making shadows easy to misinterpret. But even understanding the causes didn't make Caldwell feel any better. A child disappearance usually has at least one clear statement that matches between multiple people, but this time, there wasn't. And when the timeline was distorted like this, every conclusion about the direction Heather left the yard, the time she left, or the possibility of someone approaching her, became unreliable. Caldwell looked at the gap between the statements, the few-minute window that was the most critical darkness in the case. An officer came out from the Whitmore's porch and reported, no one remembers exactly what time she disappeared. Everyone just says a minute ago. Caldwell replied curtly, in investigations, a minute ago is the enemy. And he knew this. If the timeline was blurred from the root, any clue based on it would be wrong too. He looked toward the Whitmore house, where the mother still stood motionless, clutching the edge of her own jacket, the jacket Heather was supposed to be wearing. In that moment, Caldwell understood that this case was heading into a type unlike ordinary child disappearances. If the statements were a compass, theirs was spinning wildly, not just pointing the wrong way, but being deflected by some invisible force. And the only thing he was certain of was somewhere in those conflicting accounts, there was an empty window of time, one that the perpetrator, if there was one, had exploited perfectly. The timeline was no longer a tool to pursue the perpetrator. It had become a maze, and they were being led deeper into it without knowing which walls were real. Information about the green truck emerged. While Temple PD was trying to sort through the conflicting statements, It came from the 11-year-old boy who lived just 2 houses from the Whitmores. The same young man washing his car who had already stood out in the timeline section. But this time, the boy's new statement made every officer stop. While Caldwell and Danielson were cross-referencing the reported directions of movement, the boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and mumbled, "I think I did see a green truck driving really fast down the street today." That statement, in the current chaos, was like a small flash on a noisy CCTV screen, uncertain, but enough to latch onto. Caldwell knelt down to the boy's level and asked gently, "Do you remember when?" The boy bit his lip, thinking hard, "Right after I saw a kid's shadow run past the fence, or maybe a little before. I don't remember exactly." The time was unclear. The direction the truck was going was unclear. But the color green and the speed, really fast, were what the boy stated firmly. And because the statements about Heather were all vague, any clear information, even from a child, was prioritized for checking. Caldwell looked at Danielson, then nodded. "Check green trucks in the area." This was the first and biggest mistake in the investigation. Temple PD wasn't careless. They did what every American police department would do with a report of a fast-moving vehicle near a child disappearance scene, but they didn't realize they were clinging to the weakest thread in the entire story. Within 2 hours, a list of 8 green truck owners within a 1.5-mile radius was compiled. Colors were verified through DMV registration, and vehicles parked in the area. Caldwell and his team split up to approach each owner, knocking on doors, checking alibis, confirming vehicle locations. The first owner, an elderly man, said his truck hadn't left the driveway all afternoon. Caldwell stepped out to check. It was true the tires were evenly covered in dust, no fresh tracks. The second owner was a woman working the evening shift. Her truck was parked in the supermarket employee lot from 3 p.m. She even had her time card. The third owner, a young man, provided proof he'd been at a repair shop in Waco all afternoon. The fourth owner, a small business owner, let Caldwell view his garage security camera and confirmed the truck never left the area during Heather's disappearance. But the fifth owner was the one who made Caldwell pause longer. The middle-aged man, with shifty eyes, said he got home late from work and wasn't sure where he parked around that time. Danielson immediately checked the exhaust pipe and hood, still slightly warm, but that was understandable, since the afternoon heat lingered, and his truck could have just been driven a short unrelated distance. When questioned further, he genuinely panicked, but panic doesn't mean guilt. His wife appeared and confirmed her husband had just dropped their son off at baseball practice at 4:45 and come right back. Neither understood why they were being suspected. Caldwell concluded their fear was just a natural reaction to being aggressively questioned by police. The remaining owners were checked that night. One proved his truck had been broken down for a week. Another provided a repair invoice for a turn signal at a shop right during the time the girl went missing. Everything checked out. No one had a vehicle matching the description, appearance, headlights, scratch locations. Nothing matched any other statements besides the boy's single comment. When they returned to the Whitmore house to compile the report, Danielson looked at Caldwell heavily. None of them fit. Caldwell set the entire file down on the table. He understood this was more serious than just eliminating 8 suspects. He understood that the investigation team had spent nearly 48 golden hours, the critical time in any child disappearance, pursuing a lead that yielded no value. 48 hours can be the boundary between finding a child alive and never finding anything again. Caldwell stood silent for a moment. In his mind were images of the pristine backpack under the signpost, the faint, tangled footprints, and now, a mysterious green truck that didn't exist in reality. He wrote in his notebook, "Witness report unreliable. Vehicle likely unrelated. Redirect investigation." But the truly frightening part wasn't that they had wasted time. It was that the perpetrator, if there was one, had used the very vagueness of the witnesses to push the police far away from the real scene. And that meant this person didn't act randomly. He had a plan, and he was one step ahead of them. In that moment, Caldwell realized the case was no longer just a disappearance. It had become something else, something that demanded sophistication, patience, and someone who knew exactly how to weave just enough distortion into people's minds to send them down the wrong path. The green truck, just a mirage in the fog, but it had cost Temple PD the 2 most important days of the investigation, and the perpetrator, if he truly existed, had gained 2 more days to erase his traces. When the green truck lead was officially eliminated, and nearly 48 hours had passed without any foothold, Temple PD began to feel the invisible weight of a case slipping out of their grasp. But right as the investigation team was trying to regain direction, a new tip came in, a tip that later, Caldwell would describe as the clue that could have changed everything, if only we hadn't gone to the wrong damn building. The tip came from a middle-aged man living in the industrial area to the south, less than a mile and a half from the Whitmore home. He called the hotline, his voice tense but certain. "I saw a little girl running toward the row of warehouses behind my shop. It was getting dark. I didn't think much of it, but now seeing the news, I saw her picture. I'm sure it was the Whitmore girl." That was the first time since the afternoon Heather disappeared that a statement clearly described a direction of movement, not running around the yard, not a shadow in the afternoon light, not a mistaken imagination, a direction, a specific direction, a specific destination. Caldwell almost immediately dispatched a team to the scene. In a context where every statement was like shattered mirror pieces, any information that sounded clear became precious. The warehouse the man described was part of a complex with several rows of old corrugated metal buildings, each marked with faded painted numbers, 12A, 12B, 13A, 14. The weak yellow lights from a few poles made the whole area look like a forgotten space. The investigation team arrived around 11 p.m. As flashlight beams swept across the row of warehouses, Caldwell looked at the marking on the wall and said, "Here it is, 14A. They proceeded to check: warped roll-up door, rusty lock, inside full of rotting wooden crates, old tires, and rusted equipment. Forensics swept every square meter, no small footprints, no children's items, no sign anyone had hidden there. Nothing but dust and time." Caldwell reported back, "Negative, no relation." The tip was filed as unconfirmed sighting and set aside. No one questioned it. No one double-checked. No one asked the tipster to confirm exactly which warehouse. The reason was simple: the numbering system for the warehouses in this industrial area had changed multiple times. The number the tipster remembered no longer matched the map Temple PD was using. The man had called saying warehouse 14, the one behind the machine shop, but in PD records, 14 had been repositioned 3 years earlier. The warehouse he saw Heather running toward, the correct one, was actually warehouse number 15 on the new map. No one had told him about the change. He still called it 14, as the whole area had for years. And so, Temple PD checked the wrong warehouse, an unrelated old one. The correct warehouse, where the biggest twist in the case was hidden, was never checked in 1993. What unsettled Caldwell most when recalling this years later was the confidence the investigation team had at the time. They believed they had checked the right place. They believed that lead had been ruled out. They believed the girl the witness saw was just a mistake. That seemingly small mix-up created a gigantic hole in the investigation. Because if they had entered the correct warehouse, warehouse number 15, that night, what might they have found? A forgotten item, a partial footprint, a tire track, or worse, evidence that Heather had been there. But no one knew. No one had the chance to know. Warehouse number 15, with its hidden corner, leading to a back trail and limestone dust scattered around the door edge, sat silently in the industrial area, like a closed mouth. A young officer that night had said, "If anyone ran into this warehouse, we'd see the signs right away." But he had been standing in front of the wrong warehouse. Days later, the tip was buried under dozens of other public calls, most mistaken sightings, imaginations, or baseless. As time passed, the warehouse became a faint detail in a pile of overlapping investigation directions. No one mentioned it again. Caldwell, busy with the backpack and inconsistent statements, had no reason to return to the industrial area. It was only many years later, when the cold case was reopened, that the truth emerged. It wasn't the witness's story that was wrong. It wasn't his memory that failed. It wasn't a dead lid. The mistake was Temple PD's. They had checked the wrong warehouse, based on an outdated map that no one knew was outdated. The correct warehouse, the one the witness insisted Heather had run toward, had never been opened, never been entered, never had a flashlight shown inside, and in those early years, no one knew it might hold the most important piece of the puzzle, a small silent trace, patiently waiting to be discovered. This was the second major misdirection in the investigation, and the mistake Caldwell would regret for years, because unlike the green truck, which was just a child's imagination, the correct warehouse could have told the truth if they had only opened one more door. But that opportunity closed that very night, and Temple PD fell deeper into the maze that the perpetrator, though no one knew he existed, seemed to have built around them. In the days that followed, the silence surrounding the Heather Whitmore case was no longer just the neighborhood's silence. It became the silence of the entire investigation system. No body, no signs of injury, no forgotten items besides the deliberately placed backpack. No witnesses seeing suspicious behavior, no security cameras, because in 1993, the Temple residential area had none, and most importantly, no final point where anyone could definitively say Heather had been. Temple PD wanted to act as a professional investigation unit, should reconstruct the scene, connect the statements, determine search perimeters, map out every possibility. But after 5 days, all they had was a chain of gaps stretching from the Whitmore's backyard to 4 blocks east, and from there extending into endless nothingness, where no one could point to Heather's true last appearance. Caldwell sat in the PD meeting room, facing a map of the area, the numbered evidence backpack, the statement notebook, and the list of eliminated investigation directions. Each line in the report was like a stroke erasing hope of finding her. He recalled previous child disappearances in Texas. There was always something, a skid mark, a scream, a witness seeing the child run into the street, or even a dropped toy. But Heather's case had none. Nothing left behind, nothing broken, no noise made. An absolute disappearance. The problem was, laws and police procedures in the 1990s required classifying the case before escalating investigation resources. And right there, Temple PD hit an invisible wall. If Heather was a runaway, this was low priority, though rare for a 9-year-old. If Heather was simply lost and hiding somewhere, missing, the local search team could handle it. But if Heather had been taken by someone abducted, then the FBI had to be notified, and criminal behavior models activated. Caldwell tried pushing the file toward abduction. He argued that the backpack was too clean, its location too unusual, and the lack of traces was a sign of third-party intervention. But his commander had to follow the law, not hunches. "We have no body, no signs of force, no witness seeing anyone approach her. It's all assumption," he said. "We can't call it abduction yet, but it can't be a runaway," Caldwell countered. Heather was 9, no money, no belongings, no reason. The commander nodded. "I understand, but legally we need clear signs for classification." And then, the temporary label the case received made Caldwell's heart heavy as stone. Missing child, undetermined circumstances, a vague label, a gray area in investigation procedure. A zone with no specific guidance beyond continue searching within local force capabilities. In the following days, PD tried to keep the search fire alive. Volunteers, search dogs, underwater equipment, all were deployed. They swept every bush, every ditch, every dirt road around the Temple neighborhood. But once again, nothing. What they found only reinforced what had been haunting Caldwell. If someone took Heather, that person knew exactly how to avoid leaving traces. Caldwell couldn't stop thinking about the warehouse, the one they had checked wrong. Though he had no logical reason to return, his gut told him that industrial area was more important than the current report showed. But no one wanted to go back when warehouse row 14 was already marked, no connection. The case began slipping into a suspended state, its ambiguity almost swallowing everything. No body, meaning they couldn't determine she was dead. no leads, meaning they couldn't call it a crime, no voluntary departure, meaning they couldn't conclude runaway. Heather became a child who both existed and didn't in the system. This made the file start to fade, not disappear, but not fit any standard investigation pattern. In internal records, a note was added: case does not meet clear criteria for abduction, runaway, or missing. Extended monitoring recommended. And then, on the 10th day since Heather disappeared, Temple PD officially labeled Heather's file missing child, long-term, a cold, dry and cruel label in how it described cases like this: no progress, no conclusion, and not enough leads to invest more resources. The case wasn't closed, but it was no longer daily priority. It would sit in a drawer for cases PD hoped, but didn't believe, would be solved. Caldwell stood looking at the final classification sheet pinned to the file. He was silent for a long time. Not because the case was downgraded, but because he understood this: no body means no crime. No crime means no investigation. No investigation means the perpetrator, if he existed, had won the first round, and he didn't know how many years he would pay to correct it. Part 9 will open with the anonymous letter in 1997. In 1997, 4 years after the day Heather disappeared, the case was barely mentioned weekly in Temple PD meetings anymore. The missing child, long-term file was only reopened for new public reports, and most were false information. People thinking they'd seen Heather at the supermarket, in the park, or on an interstate bus. All led to dead ends. Caldwell, though still haunted by the case, had to move on to other duties. He hadn't forgotten Heather. He just had nothing to continue with. The case gradually became a scar lying dormant under layers of time. Then, one June morning in 1997, the Temple PD receptionist walked into the investigation room with a thin white envelope, no return address, only bold scrawled words written in black marker: ATN Temple Police. Caldwell, who happened to be there handing over reports for another case, saw the envelope and felt something immediately touch his memory. He didn't know why. He just knew that envelope looked wrong, deliberately wrong. He asked the receptionist to take it to forensics before anyone touched it. An officer wearing gloves opened the envelope right in the examination room. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. On it, just one sentence, written in hard, heavy strokes: "You won't find her where you search." Caldwell felt as if someone had just yanked his old obsession back into the present. This wording wasn't the usual cruel prank. It also wasn't like the notes from mentally disturbed people PD had received in previous years, because it contained two strange things. The writer said "where you search," as if he knew where they had looked, and he said "you won't find her," as if he knew Heather's exact status. A young officer blurted out, "It could just be a hoax." Caldwell shook his head immediately. "No, someone is referring to specific search areas, and he knows we haven't searched the right place." The statement silenced the room, because it implied the sender had deep knowledge of the case, or worse, was trying to suggest he was the one who took Heather. Caldwell ordered handwriting analysis, comparing it to every record from 1993 interviews, but the results came back 2 weeks later ice cold. No match to any subject, no match to neighbors, no match to old suspects, no match to anyone interviewed within a 1-mile radius of the Whitmore home. The handwriting was sharp but scrawled, like someone deliberately altering it to avoid recognition. This made Caldwell suspect the letter might be from someone intentionally disguising it, but why? To create noise, or because he feared identification. The forensics team examined the envelope and found tiny traces of saliva under the glue flap, a rare chance for DNA. Caldwell felt his heart pound for the first time in 3 years. He thought, if we can extract DNA, this could be the breakthrough. But in 1997, DNA analysis technology in Texas and nationwide was still in its infancy. They tried extracting DNA from that tiny saliva sample, but the amount was too small, too contaminated, and insufficient for a comparable profile. The report came back with just 6 words: sample insufficient for analysis. Caldwell read the paper 3 times. He felt as if the case had just tightened another invisible noose around them, showing that the perpetrator, if the letter was really from him, was many steps ahead. No DNA, no fingerprints, no cameras, no witnesses. And now, a letter knowing information never released to the public, because Temple PD had never disclosed search perimeters, never said they swept the industrial area, never mentioned the backpack or the wrong directions. So what did he know? That they had searched the wrong places, that they never found the right warehouse, or even how they were building the timeline. Caldwell had no proof the letter was from the perpetrator, but he knew one thing for sure: the writer wasn't just someone who heard the news. He knew things only someone involved would know. And then, in the resource shortages, the struggles of a small police department, and DNA technology not yet strong enough, the letter was sealed, placed in an evidence bag, and filed in a separate section of Heather Whitmore's case, the section labeled, "Pending, Future Testing." But the future back then was just a distant concept. Temple PD had no tools to go further with the letter. The case continued drifting into darkness, carrying a new secret. Someone was watching, knew they were searching the wrong places, and wasn't afraid at all. And Heather's file, which was already fading, officially entered a phase of absolute invisibility. Only many years later, when genetic genealogy emerged, did Caldwell understand that this letter was the first chain linking them to the real perpetrator. But in 1997, it was just another ghost in the file, one that whispered truths no one could verify. After the 1997 anonymous letter, the Heather Whitmore case was never truly closed, but it also no longer lived in the sense of active investigation. It slipped into the gray zone every investigator fears, the zone of motionless cases, where time not only fades witness memories, but erodes the very structure of the file. The period from 1998 to 2013 was a long chain of small mistakes, accumulating into gigantic holes in the file, making the case no longer resemble its original shape. Caldwell often described this time as a paperwork whirlwind, meaning anyone trying to find the file's logic would be swept into the chaos of the storage system itself. After 1998, Temple PD switched to a new storage structure. Old files, which had been held together with large metal clips, were required to be separated into multiple folders by document group. Statement 7, physical evidence, crime scene photos, forensic reports, public tips, and sensitive materials. It sounded scientific, but this very separation was the beginning of the chaos. The statements folder was split into two parts: adult statements and child statements, making the already tangled timeline even more prone to contradictions, because the two witness groups gave different times, but instead of being placed side by side for comparison, they ended up in two different folders, in two different drawers, handled by two different people. The physical evidence folder had an even bigger problem. The backpack, one of the few leads, was mislabeled in 2001, when PD moved storage warehouses. Recovered near 4th Street was somehow retyped as recovered near 4th Street Park, a completely different location, nearly half a mile from the actual spot. This led to a chain of wrong assumptions in the following years, as new investigators read the file and believed the park area was a hot spot, when in reality, it had never been involved. Worse still, the limestone dust sample collected from the bottom of the backpack was moved to the unclassified residue folder, a label used for samples with insufficient information or not yet analyzed. It ended up mixed with unrelated soil samples from other cases, so later investigators never realized it was limestone dust from the industrial area north of Temple, the crucial piece that no one understood in 1993. Another error was in the timeline section. Originally, the 1993 timeline was written based on approximate times, around 5 o'clock, near 5:15, about 7 minutes after Heather left the yard. But in 2002, a new investigator on the team, who wasn't familiar with the old note-taking style, tried to pin down the timeline by converting all the approximate times into specific numbers, based more on guesses than facts. 5 o'clock-ish became 4:57 p.m. Near 5:15 became 5:13 p.m. No one objected, because no one still remembered the real times, and from then on, the case timeline was just a reconstructed version, based on the memory of someone who wasn't even there in 1993. The chaos also lay in the sensitive materials folder, where the 1997 anonymous letter was kept. Instead of being placed in a section specifically for evidence pending future DNA testing, the letter was labeled miscellaneous correspondence. It sat among unrelated anonymous letters, citizen notes, and internal reports from other cases. If Caldwell hadn't remembered the content clearly, the letter could have sunk completely into the pile of papers no one ever checked. By 2005, when PD switched to electronic storage software, a data entry error caused Heather's file to display under the category Missing Child, Possible Runaway in the electronic system, despite the paper file clearly stating undetermined circumstances. This discrepancy lasted for years, causing anyone relying on the electronic system for reviews to misunderstand the nature of the case. Later, when the cold case unit got involved, they had to spend 2 weeks just confirming what the original file category actually was. But the biggest mistake, and the one with the deepest impact, was that no one recognized the 1997 letter contained information never made public. The phrase "where you search" implied the writer knew the search perimeters. For many years, no one connected this to the fact that the correct warehouse had never been checked. If DNA technology in 1997 had been better, or if the letter's storage folder had been labeled more accurately, everything might have taken a different turn. Amid the storage errors, the distorted timelines, the misplaced evidence, the Heather case didn't just go cold, it became invisible. A file that was half truth, half fiction, making anyone who touched it feel like they were chasing their own shadow underwater. Caldwell, who had been the lead investigator on the case, would occasionally reopen the file and try to reorganize everything as it was in 19. But the further along it got, the more it felt like he was trying to put together a puzzle whose pieces had changed shape over time. And then, in late 2013, as Temple PD began considering a records department overhaul and forming a semi-dedicated cold case team, a question was raised in a meeting: is there any case in the system that's so messed up in storage that it can't be properly evaluated anymore? Caldwell simply said 3 words: Whitmore entire case. They didn't yet know that just 1 year later, the truth buried for 2 decades would start to surface, layer by layer. And it all began when the cold case unit found the original backpack photo that no one had ever paid attention to. In 2014, when Temple PD established the city's first cold case unit, a small team of 3 seasoned investigators and 1 file analyst, Heather Whitmore's file was placed on the table almost immediately. Not because it was the most famous case, but because it was the most distorted one. Too many pieces no longer fit, too many documents no longer in their proper places, and too many investigation directions conducted in the darkness of the 1990s. But that very mess intrigued the cold case team. Among the 3, Detective Ryan Delacroix, who had worked at Dallas PD before moving back to Temple to care for his aging mother, was particularly sensitive to forgotten cases. He wasn't the type of investigator who chased big breakthroughs. He was the careful, persistent type who stared long at things others dismissed as trivial errors, and the Heather case, in his eyes, wasn't a grand mystery. It was a series of small mistakes that had accumulated into an investigative disaster. In the first week, Ryan spent all his time reviewing every piece of evidence photographed in 1993. He spread out on the table all the original photos. PD still had backyard photos, street edge photos, a few faint footprints, and finally, the pink backpack photos, the only evidence the perpetrator, if one truly existed, might have manipulated. That very photo, the one forgotten for 20 years, was what led Ryan to his first discovery, the push that moved the case into a new phase. The backpack wasn't dropped, it was placed. In the original photo, the pink backpack was under the traffic sign, tilted at a 45-degree angle, straps turned inward, zipper facing outward. Ryan looked closely, and still couldn't understand why it felt unnatural. He tilted his head left, then right, then zoomed in using contrast adjustment software. Still the same, so he grabbed a backpack from the discarded evidence locker and tried placing it on the floor, to make it match the photo as closely as possible. Then he dropped it from hip height, then from head height, then placed it on a chair, and let it fall. Not once did the backpack land in the exact position from the photo. No natural drop created that precise angle, with the zipper straight and the straps pressed against the pole edge. He tried many more times. Same result. Finally, Ryan wrote in his notes, "Staged placement, not dropped, not thrown, deliberately positioned." If the backpack was placed, that meant the perpetrator returned to the scene a second time, after Heather disappeared. This didn't match PD's 1993 assumptions, but it opened a completely new path. The perpetrator wanted police to find the backpack, and wanted them to find it in the wrong place. Ryan called Caldwell, who was nearing retirement, to PD to see the discovery. When he looked at the photo, Caldwell stood silent for a long time. Then he said something Ryan would never forget. "I knew something was wrong from day one. It's just we didn't have the tools to figure it out." The dark blue fiber, the clue forgotten for 21 years. In the sealed records, Ryan found an evidence bag labeled sample hash 14, fiber, with no clear source noted. He had to dig back into the 1993 scene collection logs to confirm it was the small fiber stuck to the backpack zipper, one single fiber, less than 1 centimeter long. At the time, no lab had the capability to analyze fibers at that depth. But in 2014, it was different. Ryan sent the sample to the DPS Austin Textile Materials Lab, requesting analysis of fiber type, dyeing process, polyester ratio, and possible origin. 2 weeks later, the report came back, and it stunned the entire team. The fiber belonged to upholstery used in limited-run commercial truck seats, 1990, 1994, but not found in any vehicles in the Temple area in 1993. In other words, no vehicle in the Whitmore neighborhood used that type of seat. No truck owner within a 1-mile radius ever had seats with the same weave structure. No repair records showed seats being replaced in the area at that time. Ryan realized he had just touched a detail that PD 20 years earlier never had the technology to uncover. The perpetrator didn't live in the neighborhood, and the perpetrator used a type of vehicle not common in Temple. The conclusion that changed the entire direction of the case. Immediately, Ryan created a summary board with 3 lines. 1. Backpack was placed, not dropped. Perpetrator actively staged the scene. 2. Fiber doesn't belong to any vehicle near the victim's home. Perpetrator came from elsewhere or had a specialized vehicle. 3. Limestone dust on backpack doesn't appear in the residential area. Backpack had been in the industrial area. 3 lines, 3 pieces, and when placed together, they painted a clearer picture than any theory Temple PD had ever had. Heather didn't disappear from the backyard, and the backpack was brought to the discovery location only to mislead them. This was the first time in over 2 decades that the case was no longer based on neighbors' vague memories or distorted statements. For the first time, it was based on science. Caldwell admitted the mistake and decided to return to the warehouse. Ryan presented his findings to Caldwell, who had become a voluntary advisor for the cold case unit. Caldwell looked at the backpack photo again and said, "We checked the wrong warehouse. I never forgot that." Ryan felt a chill down his spine. "You think that place could still have traces after 20 years? Caldwell didn't answer right away. He looked at the backpack photo, at the fiber in the evidence bag, and remembered the unease from that day, the feeling they were searching in the wrong place. Finally, he said, if the perpetrator was confident enough to place the backpack, he was confident enough to believe we wouldn't go back to the right place. And he was right for 20 years. That was the moment that marked the rebirth of the case. No longer an invisible file, no longer scattered memories, no longer a mess of conflicting statements. The Heather Whitmore case had opened its eyes again, and this time, it had new guides. A young investigator whose eyes didn't easily miss the unusual, and a former officer carrying a regret that had never faded. They didn't yet know that the dark blue fiber, that tiny piece of evidence, nearly thrown in the trash, would lead them to a perpetrator no one had ever suspected. But to get there, they had to open a door that had been silently closed for 21 years, warehouse number 15. Analysis of the dark blue fiber didn't just open a new investigation direction, it nearly shattered the entire hypothesis that had existed for 2 decades. When the report from the Austin lab arrived, Ryan read it 3 times in a row, not because he didn't understand, but because it changed the case structure so quickly, so decisively. Each line of the results was like light shining straight into the darkness, forgotten since 1993. The fiber was so rare, it wasn't in Temple. The report stated clearly, fiber matches upholstery, used only in limited-run commercial truck seats, 1990, 1994. No matching vehicle registrations in Temple or adjacent towns during 1993. This meant asterisk, no vehicle registered in Temple used this type of seat, asterisk. This truck type was too specialized, usually only in industrial fleets or vehicles belonging to people in specialized technical trades, asterisk. This fabric didn't appear in any local repair garages throughout the 90s, meaning it wasn't a common replacement material. Ryan opened a map of Temple and circled the entire residential area around the Whitmore home. No one in the neighborhood had a job related to industrial transport, mining, or heavy engineering. Temple in 1993 was a classic residential area, mostly teachers, small factory workers, office employees, farmers, and a few shop owners. No one had reason to own such a rare truck, and if the perpetrator's vehicle wasn't from Temple, the perpetrator most likely didn't live in Temple, or he was just passing through. This was something never considered in the original file, which had focused 100% on the immediate radius around Heather's home. Limestone dust, the second piece of evidence confirming the new theory. Ryan continued re-examining the limestone dust sample that had been misunderstood and misfiled. When reviewing geological records, he noticed something. PD in 1993 didn't have enough data to connect. The limestone in the sample matched the industrial area north of Temple, especially the cluster of warehouses along Industrial Bluff, and that was the exact area with warehouse number 15, the one that should have been checked in 1993, but was overlooked. Ryan called Caldwell in to review the report. When placing the dust comparison page on the map, Caldwell almost froze. "This is dust from a stone crusher," he said. In 1993, only a few facilities in Temple processed limestone, and they were all in the north. No one in the south side residential area would bring this dust home, meaning the backpack asterisk had been in the industrial area, asterisk, where limestone was present, asterisk, where the mischecked warehouse was, asterisk, where it could be directly linked to the perpetrator. The major turning point: Heather wasn't taken from the backyard. For nearly 20 years, Temple PD had always operated on the assumption that Heather disappeared the moment she ran inside for her purple jacket, and was then abducted nearby. But the fiber and limestone dust pushed Ryan to a completely different thought. Heather may have been taken from an entirely different location, a second location, after she left the line of sight in the yard. That meant asterisk, the first moment Heather stepped out of the yard wasn't when the perpetrator approached. Asterisk, the perpetrator may have been watching the neighborhood beforehand. Asterisk, or Heather had walked farther on her own for some reason, then was taken at another point. Ryan began reconstructing the perpetrator's movement, not based on the contradictory timeline, but on real evidence. Evidence doesn't lie. Witnesses sometimes do. Combining 3 factors: 1. Backpack deliberately placed in the wrong location. 2. Limestone dust only present in the industrial area. 3. Rare truck fiber only in specialized vehicles. Ryan understood that the perpetrator hadn't acted impulsively. He had a plan, a vehicle, and knew how to create a fake scene. That wasn't the type of local spontaneous criminal. That was the type of person who knew exactly how to mislead an investigation. Caldwell accepted the new theory, and his old regret. At the meeting table, Caldwell said for the first time what he had kept inside for 20 years. "I always thought this didn't happen in the neighborhood, but we couldn't prove it. No one listened when there was no evidence." Ryan placed the 2 samples side by side, the dark blue fiber and the limestone sample. "Now we have evidence," he said. Caldwell breathed slowly, heavily. "The industrial area to the north. That's the place we never fully searched." Ryan pressed his lips together. He knew that, and he knew this wasn't just a technical mistake by Temple PD in 1993. It was a mistake of the entire system, of technological limitations, of lax storage procedures, but blaming anyone now served no purpose. What mattered was, the case was coming back to life. The question that changed everything: why did the perpetrator bring the backpack to the residential area? Ryan posed this question in the internal meeting. If the perpetrator took Heather to the industrial area, why did he come back to leave the backpack near the house? Danielson, now a sergeant, replied, to keep us focused on searching in the wrong direction. Caldwell nodded, and he succeeded. We lost 48 hours chasing the green truck, then spent years believing she disappeared within a small radius around the house, while every trace pointed to the opposite. For the three people in the room, the feeling at that moment was like standing in front of a door that had just cracked open. Behind it was something far bigger than anything they had ever thought about the Heather case. The fiber, the limestone dust, the deliberately placed backpack. Three seemingly small details, but together they pointed to the same conclusion. The perpetrator took Heather away from the residential area, alive or dead, and the backpack was just bait to mislead them. No one in the group said it out loud, but everyone understood. The Heather Whitmore case had never been a small disappearance in a small town. It was an abduction carried out by someone who knew how to erase traces, knew how to exploit police mistakes, and knew Temple well enough to manipulate the investigation direction. Ryan felt a weight in his chest, not fear, but an awakening. We have to go back to the warehouse, he said. Caldwell closed his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them very slowly. Yes. 20 years late, but yes. They didn't yet know that when they returned, they would find the most important piece of evidence since 1993. Evidence that had silently waited for 2 decades, and this time, no one would go to the wrong warehouse. 2014 marked a crucial turning point. It was the first time Temple PD had technology powerful enough to revisit evidence that had seemed useless for 2 decades. After Ryan and Caldwell agreed that the case had to be rebuilt from science, not statements, they decided to re-examine something that had lain dormant in the miscellaneous correspondence drawer for 17 years, the 1997 anonymous letter. That thin envelope had once been Caldwell's hope, then his disappointment. But in 2014, a lab in Austin had capabilities that Temple PD in 1997 couldn't imagine: extracting DNA from an extremely small saliva sample, a technique that had only emerged in the last few years. Ryan submitted the reanalysis request, with a note: priority possible offender contact, handle with low copy sensitivity. The forensic lab received the envelope and put it through the low copy LC-DNA extraction process, using special amplification techniques to boost the signal from the trace amount. It took them nearly 3 weeks, because the DNA quantity was so low that any mistake could contaminate or ruin the sample completely. But in the end, they obtained something the Heather case had never had: a partial male DNA profile, not complete, but enough to determine gender and enough loci for comparison. When Ryan opened the email notifying him of the results, he stood up immediately, rereading every line with the feeling that someone had just breathed life into a file that seemed dead. The DNA on the envelope was not from the evidence collector, not from an officer, not from the 1997 technician. It belonged to a man. Immediately, the lab tried matching the sample to CODIS, the national database containing DNA from arrested or convicted individuals. Ryan waited not with hope, but defensively, because he knew the chances of a match were low, and the result came back exactly as he expected. No matches found in CODIS. This had 2 meanings: asterisk, the perpetrator had never been arrested; asterisk, or he was arrested, but never sampled for DNA possible before 1997. Either way, it was extremely important information. The perpetrator was not in any previous suspect list. This directly eliminated the entire group of people questioned in 1993, eliminating names PD had once suspected, but had no evidence for. The case now completely changed in nature. They were no longer investigating people who had once appeared in the investigation. They were investigating someone who had never appeared anywhere. This was when Ryan wrote a simple but weighty line in the file: carrying the burden of 2 decades of failed investigation. We have been looking at the wrong people, but the DNA couldn't take them further, unless they used something new: forensic genealogy. Ryan knew well, a partial profile couldn't produce direct matches. No hit in CODIS meant no criminal file matched the sample. But 2014 was when forensic genealogy was starting to be tested by pioneering labs, though not yet as widespread as later. This technology didn't search for the perpetrator directly, but for distant relatives, cousins, people sharing genetic lines, and from there build back the family tree to reach the main subject. If the DNA in the envelope truly belonged to the perpetrator, forensic genealogy might be the only way to drag him into the light after more than 2 decades. But the technology was still new, expensive, and not widely applied to small police departments like Temple. Ryan had to write a proposal, explaining why the case met the criteria: victim under 18, suspected abduction element, no leads for many years, likelihood the perpetrator was not in the criminal system. When the proposal was sent to the DPS office, Ryan didn't expect much, but he was surprised to receive a response from a collaborating research lab. They agreed to analyze the 1997 DNA sample to see if SNP genealogy could be used. This news nearly brought Caldwell to tears. For 20 years, he had always believed the 1997 letter held the biggest clue in the case, but no one had the tools to use it. Now, for the first time, they could unlock it. Caldwell whispered, "If he wrote the letter just to taunt us, that very letter will bring him into the light." Preparing for genealogy, decoding the incomplete DNA sample, the lab proceeded to convert the STR sample to SNP stronger for relative analysis. Use the entire remaining profile from the envelope to run the matches over threshold algorithm. Compare the sample to open genealogy databases, GED match, family tree DNA. They warned Ryan the sample was too small, the profile was incomplete, no guarantee of finding relatives. But just a few weeks later, an email from the lab arrived at Temple PD, starting with a sentence that made Ryan sit bolt upright. "We found distant relatives, not close relatives, not first cousins, but people sharing large enough genetic segments for the lab to be confident the envelope DNA belonged to the Kellerman lineage." Caldwell looked at that surname, a name almost no one in Temple remembered. No one with that surname had ever been on the suspect list. No one had ever lived in the Whitmore neighborhood. No one had ever been called in for questioning in 1993. But what gave Ryan goosebumps was the email's final sentence. Matches include 2 unrelated Kellerman branches, suggesting possible NPE non-paternity event. An NPE meant someone carrying the Kellerman name, but not the Kellerman genes, or the reverse, or someone in the family born from an unrecognized extramarital relationship. This made finding the perpetrator 10 times harder, but it was also an extremely familiar sign in genealogy cases. Perpetrators often hid in concealed family branches. The file opened its eyes. For the first time since 1993, Ryan closed the email and looked at the timeline board hanging on the wall. For the first time, an arrow with direction appeared on the diagram. Kellerman family, unclear branch envelope DNA sample perpetrator. He turned to Caldwell. "We're no longer investigating in the dark." Caldwell, his old eyes sharper than ever, nodded. "We've traced his family. Now we just have to find him." The Heather Whitmore case, which had seemed to become completely invisible, was gradually reappearing in the light of technology that no one in 1993 could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. That Kellerman branch would open a genealogical maze, leading them to a person no one had ever suspected, and that person had lived free for more than 30 years. When the lab reported that the DNA in the 1997 envelope was linked to the Kellerman lineage, no one in the cold case unit got excited right away, because those who had done genealogy knew distant relative matches were just the first door opening. Behind that door could be a clear path, or a maze full of traps. But when the deeper analysis report was sent to Temple PD in November 2014, Ryan knew immediately They had stepped into the second dangerous kind of maze, the kind where the perpetrator often hid in a family branch obscured for decades. Two unrelated Kellerman branches, but both matching the DNA. The initial analysis based on SNP markers showed distant matches like *3 people second to third cousin level in Kellerman branch A, *2 others in Kellerman branch B, in a neighboring state, and a smaller match in Kellerman branch C, split from a many generations ago. The strange thing that made the lab flag it immediately: there was no genetic reason for two Kellerman branches, not closely related, to both match at such high levels simultaneously. Normally, the perpetrator's DNA would match one single branch, then the lab would build the tree backward from there. But here branch A matched about 110 centimorgans, cm. Branch B matched, also about 108 cm. The two branches were separated by more than 3 generations, different states, different family histories. This only happens with an NPE non-paternity event, meaning someone in the family tree wasn't the biological child of the recorded father, or a child carried branch B genes, but grew up in branch A, or the reverse, or a secret adoption, affair or unlisted father. Ryan understood immediately what that meant. The perpetrator didn't have a straight-line family tree. He was the product of two genetic lines intersecting in a way the family never acknowledged. In other words, pulling one name from the family would lead to the wrong person. Chasing the wrong person would lead to a dead end. The lab's genome genealogist sent a closing sentence that made everyone who read it sigh. This profile will require triangulation of both branches. Expect 2-3 candidates at the end. And just as predicted, after 4 weeks of building the family tree, only 3 men remained in the suspect zone. The Kellerman family tree, a tangled map of secrets. Ryan printed the entire genealogy diagram and pinned it to the meeting room wall. From a distance, it looked like a multi-layered spiderweb connecting from Texas to Oklahoma, and then to Arkansas. 3 points made this map more unusual than any criminal genealogy tree Ryan had ever seen. 1. 2 branches with no historical intersection, but intersecting in DNA. No record showed any marriage or blood relation between branch A and branch B, but the perpetrator carried genes from both. 2. One man in branch A was recorded as the father of 2 sons, but only one had matching DNA. This suggested the other could be the child of a different man, or had a name change, or was informally adopted. 3. One man in branch B had a 2-year gap in records. He appeared in 1988 tax records, then vanished from Texas until 1991. No one in the family clearly remembered where he lived during those years. A suspicious gap. When piecing the information together, Ryan circled 3 names. 1. Timothy Kellerman, 29 years old in 1993, living 20 miles from Temple. 2. Gregory L. Kellerman, 31 years old, had lived near Austin for a time. 3. Marcus J. Turo Kellerman, 33 years old, had worked as a mechanical technician, moving between multiple states. 3 names, 3 men, all fitting the age range, but only one would be the full DNA match. Data quickly eliminated the first 2 suspects. Gregory. When Ryan contacted Austin PD to check movement records, they confirmed Gregory was working a shift at a factory about 80 miles from Temple on the day Heather disappeared. He had both time cards and co-worker statements. He couldn't have left work long enough to appear in Temple. Marcus was more interesting. He had lived in Texas from 1991, 1992, then moved to Louisiana. But when Ryan accessed his 1993 tax and DMV records, he discovered Marcus had left Texas a year before the Heather incident. No record of returning to Temple around the time of the case. His paperwork showed he was living more than 250 miles away. Conclusion: no longer in the suspect pool, only one person remained, Timothy Kellerman. Timothy Kellerman, the only man who lived within a close enough radius. Had no clear alibi. Had a job involving trucks and machinery. moved around the industrial area north of Temple, asterisk had the DNA that best matched the 1997 envelope. Not only that, when cross-referencing the name change 2 generations back in Timothy's family, Ryan discovered a chilling detail. A man in Timothy's grandfather's generation was recorded as the legal father, but the DNA showed he was not the biological father. This very genealogy gap was why the perpetrator had never been suspected, because he didn't match any surname PD had ever screened. Caldwell looked at the family tree and knew this was the moment PD had waited 21 years for. Caldwell stood in front of the genealogy board, looking at the 3 names circled in red. 2 were crossed out, 1 remained. He sighed, not from tiredness, but from the feeling that the tunnel finally had light at the end. So we've been going in circles for 20 years just to come back to the right person, he said. Ryan replied, "It's not coming back. This is the first time we know who to look for." From this point forward, Timothy Kellerman became the sole suspect, not because of statements, not because of direct evidence, but because of his blood, something that cannot lie. But this was only the beginning of the hardest part, finding him, tracking him, and proving he was connected to Heather. Genetic genealogy only gave them a name. It didn't prove he committed the crime. It didn't say where he was on the day Heather disappeared. It didn't explain the 1997 letter. And that was when the case shifted from the identifying a potential perpetrator phase to the dissecting his life phase. Ryan ended that day's meeting with a short sentence: "We have the family, we have the branch, we have the person left. Now it's time to see what he was doing in 1993. The Heather Whitmore case now had a clear target, and that target was about to reveal himself in a way no one expected. Timothy Kellerman, the only name left after the 2 genealogy branches merged, became the focus of Temple PD in late 2014. But when Ryan began opening his background file, he immediately recognized a dangerous paradox. The more normal Timothy was, the scarier he became. No criminal record, no serious traffic violations, no history of violence. No one had ever reported unusual behavior. For a suspect in a disappearance, possibly an abduction, that was a record clean to the point of being inconvenient. People who kill or abduct children usually leave traces in administrative records, personal history, work, friends, even rumors. Timothy had none. But that perfect normality matched a point Ryan had drawn from the fiber, from the staged backpack, and from the 1997 anonymous letter. The perpetrator wasn't impulsive, he was someone who knew how to hide. Timothy Kellerman, 29 years old in 1993, living 17 miles from Temple. DMV data showed Timothy lived in Troy, Texas, north of Temple. In 1993, he worked as a heavy equipment mechanic for a repair shop, the kind of job that used trucks with the rare polyester fiber seats, matching the fabric found on Heather's backpack. This alone was a piece that fit perfectly. However, when Ryan accessed the 1993 employment records, he ran into something frustrating. No timesheets for April 1993. The shop where Timothy worked went bankrupt in 1998. Records were scattered, most damaged or lost, meaning there was no paperwork to prove Timothy was at work on the day Heather disappeared, or conversely, left work. In other words, Timothy had no alibi. No one had ever suspected him, and that was the problem. Ryan and Caldwell conducted discreet interviews with people who had lived near Timothy in the 1990s. The results were strikingly similar, almost identical. Tim, the nicest guy in the area. He lived alone, came home from work and stayed home. Didn't drink, wasn't loud, never bothered anyone. I never saw him get angry. One female neighbor said something that made Caldwell shudder. He was almost invisible. There, but no one really noticed. This exact type of person, quiet, reserved, no trouble, was the type of perpetrator who blended into a community most easily. Re-examining Timothy's movements in 1993, Ryan traced every possible trail. Tax record valid. No anomalies. Wanderlist Taubsick bold. Wanderlist Taubsick bold. Wanderlist Taubsick bold. Wanderlist Taubsick bold. Waneless taubsick bold, 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 yo. Lasek word benos porn Ford. Ryan found something important. Timothy had owned a 1991 truck, the model with seats compatible with the fiber found on the backpack. The truck was no longer registered after 1996. Most likely it had been sold cheaply, parted out, or transferred without paperwork, common before 2000. Logically, this didn't prove guilt, but technically, this was the strongest match Temple PD had from 1993 to now. The problem, Mr. Perfect alibi. But the kind that can't be verified. When asking one of Timothy's old co-workers about April 1993, the person replied, "I think Tim was at work that day. But I could be wrong. It's been 20 years. Another said, "We usually worked shifts, not fixed hours. I really don't remember." Meaning asterisk, no one could confirm Timothy was present, asterisk, but no one could confirm Timothy was absent either. This was the most dangerous type of suspect. Didn't match any statements, but also wasn't contradicted by any statements. Police set up surveillance, and Timothy showed exactly what they feared. A quiet 24/7 surveillance operation was implemented. Timothy was now in his 50s, working at a small garage on the outskirts, living a life so peaceful it was unnaturally flat. Over 3 weeks of surveillance, asterisk, Timothy had no traffic violations, asterisk, no contact with children, asterisk, no visits to the old industrial area, asterisk, no unusual behavior, asterisk, no close friends, no dating, no socializing. Caldwell said, "The most invisible people are often the most dangerous." Ryan agreed, but the surveillance hadn't shown any movement that could justify a search warrant or forced DNA sample. Timothy was too careful, too quiet, too silent. But then in the 4th week, they noticed a strange habit. Asterisk, Timothy drove to the old warehouse in the North Temple industrial area every Sunday. Asterisk, he didn't go inside. Asterisk, he just sat in his car for about 10-15 minutes, then left. The exact warehouse number 15. The warehouse overlooked in 1993. Ryan wrote in the report, subject visits old location weekly, possible psychological anchor point. This didn't prove a crime, but it showed Timothy had an emotional attachment to the place. And if warehouse number 15 was indeed the second point, the one Ryan's new theory pointed to, then that habit couldn't be considered harmless. Caldwell offered the first psychological theory about Timothy. There are abductors who don't return to the scene to gloat, he said. They return because of the memory. Because that place is the breaking point in their life, and they're haunted by their own actions. Ryan looked at the surveillance photo, Timothy sitting in his car, eyes blank, staring at the warehouse, not moving, not making a call, not doing anything, just staring, like someone talking to a ghost. Now there was only one step left, get Timothy's DNA. Forensic genealogy only gave them the right bloodline. Surveillance only gave them suspicious behavior. Personal history only gave them no alibi. The 1991 truck only gave them matching vehicle. But to connect Timothy to the 1997 letter, they needed direct DNA. The problem, Timothy had never been arrested. No authority for a forced sample. Surveillance wasn't strong enough for a warrant. Ryan said, "We have to wait for him to throw something away." Caldwell sighed. "How long?" Ryan replied, "As long as it takes. This is our only shot." And Temple PD was patient like never before. Week 5. Then week 6. Then week 7. No cigarette butts. No discarded soda cans. No tissues. Timothy was clean to a suspicious degree, as if he knew they were waiting for one small mistake, but they couldn't stop. Couldn't go back to square one. Couldn't let the Heather case fall silent again. Day 51 of surveillance, the first time in years, Timothy made a mistake. A small mistake, but enough to shatter 3 decades of darkness. An item he tossed into a public trash can, and that was the moment Ryan said to Caldwell, He just handed us his DNA. Day 51 of surveillance, the day Ryan would later describe as the fateful day for a case that never had a chance, unfolded completely normally, for nearly 15 hours. Timothy worked as usual, opened the garage, repaired an air compressor, ate lunch alone in his car, stood watching the rain for about 4 minutes, then went back inside. Not a single sign he knew he was being watched. Not a single gesture suggesting he was about to slip up. But at 7:42 p.m., one small action made Ryan bolt upright from his observation chair. Timothy stepped out of the garage, holding a paper coffee cup and a used tissue. He didn't throw them in the garage trash like every other day. Instead, he drove to a gas station more than a mile away and tossed both into the public trash can outside, where police didn't need a warrant to collect trash under legal precedent. Ryan said over the radio almost immediately, "We have discard. Move." Just 2 minutes after Timothy left the gas station, the surveillance team approached the trash can, using gloves and tongs to retrieve exactly those 2 items. The entire process was video recorded per chain of custody procedure. Caldwell whispered behind Ryan as they sealed the evidence bag, "Finally, we have his DNA." The lab received the samples, and the atmosphere was tense to the point of suffocating. The samples from the coffee cup and tissue were rushed that night to DPS Austin in a priority envelope. Ryan included a short, clear note, "Compare with 1997 letter, high urgency." The lab responded that they would attempt DNA extraction from both items. The paper cup might contain epithelial cells from his lips. The tissue was almost certain to have plenty of cells from nasal mucus and saliva. The 3 days waiting for results were the longest 3 days in Ryan's career. Caldwell asked the same question every morning. "Any news yet?" Ryan could only shake his head, but on the morning of the 4th day, when the lab email appeared with the subject "Preliminary results, high confidence," his heart pounded so hard he had to sit down. He opened the email, read it, then read it again, then called Caldwell breathless. "DNA from the tissue 1-1 match with the 1997 envelope." The final line in the email made the entire Temple PD meeting room fall into absolute silence. "Profile from Kleenex is a direct match to male DNA extracted from the 1997 envelope seal. Probability of coincidental match, 1 in 2.5 quintillion. Conclusion, same individual." Caldwell placed his hand on the chair, trembling slightly. Ryan closed his eyes for a few seconds, to realize that most of his instincts over the past months weren't just right, they were frighteningly right. Timothy Kellerman was the person who sent the 1997 anonymous letter, meaning he knew something only the perpetrator could know. They were no longer police groping in the dark, they were facing the right person, but the lab sent one more piece of information that pushed the case into even more dangerous territory. At the end of the report was an additional sentence: "Envelope DNA is extremely low quantity, cannot confirm transfer source or time." This meant asterisk. The DNA told who was connected to the envelope, asterisk, but it couldn't determine when or how the DNA got on the envelope. A defense attorney, if the case went to trial, would definitely exploit that point. Ryan understood it immediately. The current evidence proved Timothy was involved with the 1997 letter, but the letter wasn't the disappearance case. The letter was just a post-event document, meaning Timothy was someone who knew the secret, but not enough to say he abducted Heather. The case entered its most tense phase. The suspect was identified, but police couldn't arrest yet. Caldwell delivered the assessment he had waited 21 years for. He stood up, looking at every investigator in the room. "This is no longer suspicion, no longer guesswork, no longer theory. DNA has said this man knows about Heather, and he said it as if he wanted us to know." Then he added the sentence Ryan would remember forever: "An innocent person doesn't send a letter after 4 years with information only the perpetrator would know." And indeed, the 1997 anonymous letter wasn't just the sentence, "You won't find her where you search." It also implied, asterisk, he knew the areas police were searching, asterisk, he knew what they hadn't released, asterisk, he knew Heather wasn't where PD thought, asterisk, He knew they had missed the most important point. No one but the perpetrator could know those things. Timothy Kellerman, the invisible man for 2 decades, had now revealed himself, not through a mistake, but through the very action he had used to try to cover his crime. But why did the perpetrator send the letter in 1997? Ryan asked this question immediately, and it was the most important question. Caldwell answered first. The perpetrator wanted to control the narrative. Then he added, or he was scared, or he felt threatened by something in 1997. Ryan wrote on the board, 1997. What was the perpetrator afraid of? Who made him send the letter? What was police doing at that time? When they dug back into the reports, everything became clearer. Asterisk. In 1997, Temple PD reopened Heather's file as part of a campaign reviewing juvenile cases. Asterisk. The press ran a small article about PD re-examining old missing persons cases. Asterisk. Some volunteers organized spontaneous searches near the Whitmore neighborhood. Timothy, if he was the perpetrator, might have thought police were getting close to the area he had misled them away from. And the letter was a warning, a form of manipulation, or did he want to push PD even further from the warehouse area? No one knew the answer yet. One truth colder than the DNA, Timothy was still living normally, even as authorities identified him as the prime suspect. The next morning, surveillance reported, asterisk, Timothy drove to work as usual, asterisk, stopped at warehouse number 15, like every Sunday, asterisk, showed no unusual behavior, asterisk, no avoiding anyone, no route changes, no burning documents. That was the coldness of truly dangerous people. Even as the truth tightened around him, he remained still as stone. Ryan knew this was no longer an investigation, this was a race. The longer they watched, the more time Timothy had to realize he was being hunted. But if they rushed an arrest, they wouldn't have enough evidence to charge. One DNA from a letter couldn't convict for abduction or murder. They needed something connecting him to the 1993 scene. Needed his DNA at the warehouse, needed his DNA on other evidence, needed a false statement, needed something to lock him down. The Heather case was no longer a 21-year mystery. It had become a manhunt for a dangerous suspect, where any wrong move could let him escape for another 21 years. Ryan ended the report section with one line, suspect identified. But the real investigation starts now. The confrontation with Timothy Kellerman didn't take place in a cold interrogation room like people imagine in movies. It happened on a gray afternoon, with light rain drizzling in the Temple PD parking lot, when Ryan and Caldwell decided the time for a soft approach had come, the moment to look straight into the eyes of the man whose DNA had led them there. They couldn't arrest him, couldn't read him his Miranda rights, couldn't apply pressure, but they could talk. Observe touched the nerve of guilt, if it existed, and they hoped for one thing: Timothy would contradict himself. The encounter began with silence. When Timothy was asked to come out and meet the 2 investigators, he seemed calm. But this calmness wasn't the carefree kind. It was taut, like a strung wire, aware he was being watched, or just a man who had always lived on guard. Ryan started, "We're reviewing the Heather Whitmore disappearance. We need to ask about the years you worked at North Temple Equipment." Timothy looked down at his hands, where his nails were bitten down to the point of pain. Timothy didn't respond, but he swallowed hard, a gesture Ryan had learned to recognize over 15 years of investigations. Caldwell continued, his voice low but not threatening, "We have the letter sent to PD in 1997. We have DNA. We know you were involved with that envelope." This time Timothy looked up faster than reflex, and in that moment, Ryan saw what he needed to see, not anger, not defiance, but fear. The collapse began with a trembling sentence. Timothy opened his mouth, but the words didn't match his expression. "I didn't do anything to her." A denial, but in a shaking voice, as if what mattered wasn't refuting it, but forcing out something that was choking his heart. Ryan didn't react right away. That was the technique. Let the suspect feel the emptiness, forcing them to fill it. Timothy continued, "I never touched that girl, never." And then, as if a dam had burst in his chest, Timothy said the third sentence, the one that made Ryan stand up immediately. "He forced me." No one asked who, no one mentioned an accomplice, No one suggested it. Timothy said it himself. A new name emerged. Raymond Cole. Caldwell tried to keep his voice steady. Timothy. Who are you talking about? Timothy was shaking so hard that the small spasms in the hand on his thigh were visible. He looked down at the floor, as if wanting to bury his gaze in the corner tile. Then he said Raymond Cole. This name wasn't in any of the 1993 case files, didn't appear on the suspect list, wasn't in the neighbor records, wasn't someone PD had ever interviewed. Who was Raymond Cole? Ryan wrote the name in his notebook, heart pounding. Timothy told the story, not fluently, but like someone haunted for 20 years. The story didn't flow in long paragraphs. It came out in pieces, fractured fragments of buried memory. Timothy, he was at the shop, in '93. Temporary job. Only a few months. Ryan immediately saw the fit. A temporary worker no one remembered, no one recorded, no one tracked down. In the '90s, PD wasn't required to check every shop within the residential radius. This was a gap where a perpetrator could hide. Caldwell asked gently, "You and Cole worked the same day Heather disappeared?" Timothy didn't answer directly. Instead he closed his eyes, tears streaming, not the tears of an innocent man, but of someone who had lived with an unerased image for 20 years. He took her. He made me drive. Ryan held his breath. This wasn't a direct confession, but it was an accusation against a second person. Timothy continued. I told him no. I said leave her, but he had this look, like he was already gone. Ryan, where did he take Heather? Timothy shook his head, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't want to say. Caldwell leaned in. Timothy, if you didn't harm the child, you have to tell the truth. If you were forced, this is your only chance to save the rest of your life. Timothy blurted out the sentence that sent chills down both investigators' spine. He said she wouldn't scream if I didn't look. No one in the room could speak for several seconds. Timothy described April 23, 1993, as if it were yesterday. According to him, Raymond Cole arrived at the shop in the morning, tense and irritable. Toward the end of the afternoon, Raymond disappeared for about 30 minutes. When he returned, Raymond ordered Timothy to drive the 1991 truck to the industrial area north of Temple. Timothy saw something hidden in the truck bed, but didn't dare ask. When the truck stopped at warehouse number 15, Raymond pulled Timothy close and whispered, "Don't look at her. Just open the door." Timothy continued shaking violently. "I didn't touch her. I swear. He made me hold the door. Then he took her inside. I stayed outside. I heard something." Timothy couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Ryan and Caldwell understood all too well. But who was Raymond Cole? Ryan opened his laptop right at the table, searching for Raymond Cole in *1993 employment records, *tax records, *Texas driver's licenses, *the temporary resident list at North Temple Equipment, *seasonal employee files. No one by that name in the system, no Raymond, no Cole, no one with a similar name. Timothy saw the investigators' confusion, and broke down crying. He wasn't using his real name, and that sentence spun the case in a completely new direction. The final 3 details Timothy revealed, and they were the key to unlocking 21 years of darkness. Detail 1. Raymond had a tattoo of a snake coiled around a cross on his left arm. Detail 2. Raymond had bragged about working in Oklahoma, but having trouble with local police. Detail 3. Raymond had driven a truck with dark green seats, matching the fiber stuck to Heather's backpack. Everything started falling into place. The fiber 9094 truck, limestone industrial area, staged backpack fake scene, 1997 lettuce sent by someone with inside knowledge, Timothy, coerced or manipulated accomplice, Raymond anonymous man, no records, no trace, no real name. Ryan and Caldwell looked at each other. They understood. The Heather Whitmore case didn't have just one perpetrator, it had 2, one in the shadows, one controlled by the shadow of the other. And now, their task was to find the nameless man who might have left Texas years ago, who had used a false identity, and whom Timothy had feared enough to stay silent for nearly 3 decades. Timothy wasn't the key to closing the case. Timothy was only the first door opening to the monster behind it. Ryan turned off the recorder and wrote a line on the new timeline board. 1993. 2 men. Timothy driver, Raymond abductor, identity unknown. From here, the case was no longer about the question, did Timothy commit the crime? It shifted to a bigger, darker, more dangerous question, who was Raymond Cole really, and where has he been for the past 21 years? When Ryan and Caldwell left the room after confronting Timothy, they said nothing for 5 minutes. They walked straight to the office, closed the door, and Ryan opened his laptop as if time were chasing them. The name Raymond Cole, a name that sounded both familiar and murky, became the center of the investigation, but they quickly realized a terrifying truth: no Raymond Cole had ever existed in the Temple system in 1993. No driver's license, no tax records, no work permit, no employee list. A ghost. But every ghost leaves traces, if you know where to look. Tattoo database. The first lead emerged. Caldwell suggested he had a snake coiled around a cross tattoo. That kind was common among mechanics in the 80s, 90s. The Texas Department of Public Safety DPS tattoo database wasn't large, but they had a catalog of tattoos recorded from arrests before 2000. Ryan searched for similar designs within asterisk coiled snake, asterisk cross, asterisk hybrid of the two symbols. Only 3 people had matching tattoo descriptions. 2 were immediately ruled out because they lived in Houston and Lubbock in 1993. The third, Raymond J. Cole, born 1962, arrested once in 1987 in Oklahoma for disorderly conduct. No heavy record, but the exact tattoo. Ryan said under his breath, "We found him." Cole had worked in the limestone industry, and that was the second piece falling into place. When accessing federal wage reports, Ryan found the detail that made everything instantly clear. Raymond Cole had worked for a limestone mining company near Temple in 1992, 1993. That means asterisk Cole had a reason to be in the industrial area, north of Temple. Asterisk Cole could have been exposed to limestone dust, the exact type stuck to the backpack. Asterisk Cole worked flexible shift, easy to appear near the residential area. Caldwell whispered, "This guy slipped away like a shadow, but limestone dust doesn't lie." Cole's truck perfect match with the dark blue fiber. The third piece of evidence emerged when Ryan found Arizona DMV records, where Cole had lived after 1995. Cole owned a 1991 GMC Sierra truck, the model that used the exact type of dark blue polyester fiber seats found on Heather's backpack. 3 major pieces fit perfectly. Asterisk tattoo matching description, asterisk limestone matching job, asterisk truck seat matching rare type. Caldwell looked at the evidence board, his face paling. Timothy was telling the truth. He wasn't making it up. Cole was the one who took Heather. But the big question remained, where is Cole now, and why did he disappear from the radar in the late 90s? Following the tax records, Cole vanished near the border. In 1996, Cole left Texas. In 1997, no records. In 1998, a small tax report in Arizona. From 1999, 2009, scattered appearances in the form of asterisk cheap motel receipts, asterisk seasonal job applications, asterisk isolated hospital records, asterisk minor traffic tickets. A rootless life, no fixed home, no family, just a drifting orbit. But in 2010, the trail stopped. Raymond Cole died in 2010. Ryan found this information from a death report in Cochise County, Arizona. Raymond J. Cole died February 2010 from a seizure at a construction site. No relatives, no funeral, body cremated with state funds, and so everything came crashing down in the room where Ryan and Caldwell stood. The primary perpetrator in the Heather Whitmore case had been dead for 4 years before genetic genealogy could track him down. Ryan stepped back into his chair, touching his temple. "God, he's been gone this whole time," Caldwell whispered, his voice aging 10 years. There will never be a day he stands trial. But the harsh truth was even harsher. Cole's death didn't mean the case was over. Cole's death opened more questions. Asterisk, what happened to Heather inside warehouse number 15? Asterisk, did Cole act alone, or was Timothy more involved than he claimed? Asterisk, is there any evidence once in the warehouse that still exists? Asterisk, Cole had mentioned things he'd done before, so were there other victims? Asterisk, did he kill or just abduct? Caldwell looked at the 2010 death file, where Cole was listed as a transient. We've been chasing a ghost for 21 years. Ryan corrected. No, we caught him. He just died before we could arrest him. The primary perpetrator was no longer alive to face justice, but Timothy was still alive, and he hadn't told the full truth. Ryan emphasized in the report, Cole =, primary offender, Timothy =, participant, witness accessory, case not closed. The Heather case didn't end with Raymond Cole's death certificate. On the contrary, Cole's death shifted the investigation into a new phase, one where motive, behavior and Timothy's role had to be examined to the very end. Ryan typed one final line in the report that night. Under the weary yellow light of PD, primary suspect deceased, 2010, secondary suspect alive. Truth depends on him now. Heather Whitmore had been taken by two men, one who died in obscurity, and one who was still alive, trembling in the shadow of guilt. Raymond Cole's death in 2010 didn't close the Heather case. On the contrary, it freed Temple PD from the prospect of confronting a living suspect. Ryan and Caldwell could now dig deep into Cole's entire past without the strict legal procedures required when targeting a living suspect, and their next task was to reconstruct the most accurate timeline possible of the day Heather disappeared, based on three sources. 1. Modern forensics, fiber, limestone, 1997 letter DNA. 2. Timothy's new statement. 3. Raymond Cole's employment, movement, background data. Goal: prove Cole was the primary perpetrator, and Timothy was only a witness accomplice responsible for covering up. Starting from the morning of April 23, 1993, Cole arrived at the shop in an unstable mood. According to surviving 1993 payroll data, Cole clocked in at 9:12 a.m. Timothy and two other co-workers remembered that day. Cole was irritable, snappy, and stepping out multiple times. Criminal psychology profiling shows that many child abductors in non-pattern cases often experience intense stress before the act, show restlessness before committing the crime. Caldwell looked at Cole's description and said, he was planning from the morning. 2:45, 3:15 p.m. Cole left the shop for 30 minutes unchecked. This missing time window perfectly matched, the moment Heather left the playground to get her purple jacket, the moment she vanished from friends and neighbors' sight, the direction a suspect would drive a truck into the residential area. Timothy's statement confirmed Cole could leave without notice, because shifts back then had no strict supervision. Ryan placed a red arrow on the timeline. 3 p.m. Cole arrived in the Whitmore neighborhood. 3:05, 3:10 p.m. Approaching Heather. No one saw Cole approach Heather, but forensic reconstruction showed, no struggle in the yard, no screams, no dropped items, the child disappeared in just minutes. This fit the quick lure or forced into vehicle in seconds pattern. For a 9-year-old like Heather, all it took was the perpetrator saying something convincing. Did you drop something over there? Your parents asked me to pick you up, or a small threat, and it could happen in under 20 seconds. Caldwell said, Cole was too familiar with the neighborhood from working nearby. He knew how to approach without drawing attention. 3:15, 3:30 p.m. Cole returned to the shop, carrying something hidden in the truck bed. Timothy described only seeing something in the darkness of the truck bed, but forensics proved Heather's backpack had been exposed to limestone dust, only present in the North Temple industrial area, meaning Cole, transported Heather or the backpack through the industrial area. Took both to near warehouse number 15. The dark blue fiber was considered the strongest evidence, because it matched the rare truck seat fabric Cole owned. Didn't match any vehicle around the residential area in 1993. If the backpack was in the truck bed, a fiber catching on the zipper made perfect sense. 3:34 p.m., warehouse number 15. This was the most dangerous part of the timeline. Timothy stated Cole ordered him to drive to the warehouse, not look in the truck bed, open the door so Cole could pull out what was inside, stay outside while Cole took Heather in. Theoretical forensics combined with Cole's behavior and Timothy's statement clarified, Heather may have died in the warehouse or right nearby. Cole afterward cleaned the scene or moved the body elsewhere before returning to mislead police with the backpack. The unusually clean backpack found several blocks from the house proved this. Cole wanted police to think the abduction happened near the home, not in the industrial area. 4:35 p.m., Cole ordered Timothy to help stage the scene. Timothy admitted, he never touched Heather, but he did help Cole place the backpack in the residential area, and burn a few things in the warehouse on Cole's orders. Ryan believed him on the first point. Forensics showed nothing linking Timothy to harm, but the second and third points showed Timothy was still an accessory, even if coerced. Caldwell said Timothy isn't innocent, but Cole was the perpetrator. All the forensics point to him. 1997, Cole forced Timothy to send the threatening letter to PD. One crucial piece, DNA on the 1997 letter =Timothy, but the letter's content new information only the perpetrator would know. Timothy stated Cole forced him to write it to mislead PD, because he was afraid they would search the industrial area again. This fits the psychological pattern. The perpetrator controls a weaker person to hide the guilt. Cole used Timothy as a virtual shield, an invisible man controlling someone prone to panic. Ryan's official conclusion, after reconstructing the timeline, Ryan wrote in the 23-page summary report, ending with a short but powerful paragraph. Forensics confirm Cole as the primary perpetrator. Timothy Kellerman played a supporting role in concealing the scene and sending the anonymous letter. Victim Heather Whitmore was most likely taken from the residential area and brought to warehouse number 15 around 3:30 p.m., where the entire incident occurred. Caldwell placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder. We spent 21 years just to see the picture correctly. And now, even though the primary perpetrator was dead, the truth had emerged, piece by piece, detail by detail, fiber by fiber, leading to the monstrous figure named Raymond Cole. Even though primary perpetrator Raymond Cole had been dead since 2010, Temple PD and the Bell County Prosecutor's Office agreed on one thing: a case cannot be closed when the only person still alive, the one who knows the full truth, has not yet been held accountable before the law. Timothy Kellerman did not kill Heather. Forensics did not link him to any lethal actions, but he concealed the crime, staged the scene, sent the misleading letter, and stayed silent for 21 years. Under Texas criminal law, the three most fitting charges emerged. 1. Tampering with physical evidence, interfering with, arranging or destroying evidence. 2. Obstruction of justice, hindering investigation, misleading law enforcement. 3. Failure to report a felony, not reporting a serious crime when witnessing it. Those were the three legal hammers, striking directly at Timothy's true role, not the killer of Heather, but the concealer of Heather's killer. The trial opened in heavy silence. No jostling reporters like in famous cases. No community protests. The Heather case had been gone for 21 years. Those who prayed in the 90s now had gray hair. The neighbors who once searched for Heather when she vanished no longer lived in Temple. In the courtroom that morning, there were only a few people: Heather's family, Timothy's lawyer, Ryan and Caleb, the prosecutor, and three young officers from the cold case unit. No noise, no drama, just the final truth stepping into the light. The prosecutor read the indictment, clear and sharp as a scalpel. The prosecutor began. Forensic evidence has established Raymond Cole as the primary perpetrator in the 1993 abduction and murder of Heather Whitmore. He died in 2010. But one part of the case is still alive and stands before the court today. He then listed each action Timothy had taken: driving Cole to the industrial area, opening the warehouse door, placing the backpack in the residential area at Cole's request, burning evidence, staying silent for nearly 3 decades, sending the anonymous letter to mislead police, a letter containing details never released to the public. When the prosecutor held up the 1997 envelope, Timothy bowed his head, his hands shaking so badly, his lawyer had to steady his elbow to keep him from collapsing. Defense attorney: Timothy was coerced by someone more dangerous. Timothy's lawyer did not deny the charges. Instead, he chose the coercion and threat angle, presenting that Cole was aggressive and explosive. Timothy was introverted with a history of anxiety disorder. Cole had threatened to kill him if he didn't help. Timothy feared being killed in the warehouse along with Heather. The lawyer ended with the sentence, "Mr. Kellerman is not the one who killed Heather. He is simply a survivor." Caldwell clenched his fists upon hearing that, not because he disagreed, but because it was true. Timothy was not innocent, but he was not the real monster in this story. Timothy's own statement, soft as a breath, but heavy as stone. When the court asked Timothy if he wished to say anything before sentencing, he stood up, laboriously like a man carrying a burden for 21 years. "I should have told the truth long ago. I should have reported it to the police. I should have saved that little girl." His voice choked, "But I was afraid of him, and I stayed silent, and my silence killed a family's hope for years." Heather's mother broke into sobs. Caldwell looked down at the table, avoiding letting anyone see his eyes redden. The court pronounced sentence, 27 years in prison. The judge read the sentence, voice calm, 12 years for tampering with evidence, 10 years for obstruction of justice, 5 years for failure to report, total 27 years imprisonment. No early release in the first 10 years. Timothy nodded, like a man who knew this sentence was inevitable. No one in the room celebrated, no applause, no relief, just acceptance. A chapter of darkness finally closed by the law. Official announcement: Raymond Cole was the primary perpetrator. After the trial, Ryan and Caldwell stood before the microphones at a small press conference. Ryan spoke first. Based on forensic evidence, genetic genealogy, statements and timeline reconstruction, Temple PD has determined Raymond J. Cole was primarily responsible for the abduction and murder of Heather Whitmore. A reporter asked, "But he's dead?" Ryan replied, "Yes, and that is the second tragedy of the case. The perpetrator died without ever facing justice." Caldwell closed the press conference with a sentence that silenced the entire room. "Justice delayed is still justice, and today, Heather has finally been given the truth." The Heather Whitmore case may have been legally closed after Timothy Kellerman's trial, but for Ryan, Caldwell, and Heather's family, justice was not yet fully realized. Because until then, despite forensics, statements and the timeline all pointing straight at Raymond Cole, no one knew for certain what had happened to Heather after she vanished. No body, no clear crime scene, no final clue to end the pain that had lasted 30 years. And then, a call came in early 2015 from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, AZDPS, opening the final door. The door Temple PD no longer dared hope for. "We've inventoried the old belongings of a man named Raymond Cole in a rented storage unit in Tucson. You need to get here right away." The forgotten storage unit, and Raymond Cole's final secret. Cole died in 2010, with no family, no one to claim the body, and no one to inventory his possessions. Arizona authorities had simply kept his items in an unclaimed storage locker. When Ryan and Caldwell flew to Tucson, they were led to a small warehouse where Cole's dusty containers had sat for 15 years. The metal door was rolled up. A blast of hot, dry wind swept through, and the moment they stepped inside, Caldwell had to steady himself against the nearest metal shelf. In front of him was a faded cardboard box sealed with old tape, scrawled with handwriting, P 1993. "Do not open." No forensics needed to know they had just touched the darkest heart of the case. The purple jacket, the item Heather ran home to get. In the first box, among torn newspaper pieces, old rope, and a few worthless odds and ends, Ryan spotted a faded purple. He pulled it out, and the room suddenly became so heavy, no one could speak. Heather's purple jacket, the jacket she ran home to get on that late April 1993 afternoon. The jacket she never wore again. The jacket her mother had kept in memory as the last trace of her child. Timothy had not lied. Cole had kept it, as a trophy. Caldwell stood frozen for a long time. He could only utter 3 words. That's her coat. A map of Temple, with a red circle. In the second box, Ryan discovered asterisk, an old 1991 Temple map. Asterisk pencil notes along the edges. Asterisk, and a thick red circle around the Whitmore neighborhood. Right next to the circle was an X placed exactly on the location of the Whitmore backyard. Not only that, along the map's margin, Cole had written, "Quiet place. No dogs. No lights." Goosebumps rose on Caldwell's skin. Cole had not approached Heather by chance. He had been watching the neighborhood, possibly for days before acting. Heather's personal items, the final traces. Ryan opened the third box and immediately choked up. A pink children's comb, a small notebook, a green hair tie, and a broken plastic toy. All of them had Heather W. written in childish pencil. Caldwell could not hold the notebook. His hands shook as if caught in a strong wind. There was no doubt left. Cole had not just abducted, he had kept pieces of Heather, like a sick obsession. Forensics confirmed Heather's DNA on the jacket and personal items. When the evidence was sent back to Texas, the lab confirmed immediately, asterisk DNA on the jacket 99.9% match, with Heather's sample from stored 1993. Asterisk hair tie, containing matching epithelial cells. Asterisk notebook, faint child fingerprints, matching the 1993 prints. But the biggest discovery came from the soil stuck to the bottom of the toy. The location of the body finally determined the soil on the toy contained asterisk limestone grit, asterisk fine gray sand, asterisk red clay particles, a geological mixture unique to the area south of Belton Lake, near a rarely visited wooded section. Temple PD, coordinating with Texas Rangers, deployed a search of the area only a few dozen yards wide. On day 3, they found a section of child bones. On day 5, a portion of the skull. On day 7, enough remains for forensics to confirm. The remains were Heather Whitmore's. The case finally had a body. The family finally had a place to lay flowers. Case closed. After more than 30 years, when Ryan and Caldwell went to the Whitmore home to inform them, Heather's mother clutched the purple jacket to her chest. She did not scream, did not collapse, only said one sentence as soft as a breath. "Thank you for finding my little girl." The Heather Whitmore case was officially closed in 2015, 22 years after the day she disappeared, plus a few more years for the legal proceedings against Timothy. In total, more than 30 years from the day she ran home to get her purple jacket. Temple PD's final statement read, "Primary offender, Raymond J. Cole, deceased 2010. Secondary offender, Timothy Kellerman, convicted 27-year sentence. Victim recovered near Belton Lake, evidence conclusive." Caldwell looked at the final report, his finger touching the words "case closed" that he had waited half his life for. Ryan stood beside him, silent. No one on the team celebrated. No one was happy. No one was proud. They only knew that a case that was far too late had found the truth. A child had been given back her identity, and a community carrying a wound for 30 years could finally breathe again. The Heather Whitmore case was closed, but its shadow would remain forever etched in Temple's history, as a reminder that the truth can be buried for decades, but no one can hide it forever. Looking back at the Heather Whitmore story in Temple, Texas in 1993, it's hard not to think about America today, where parents still let their kids play in the yard, where neighborhoods that seem as safe as the Whitmore area still believe that couldn't happen here. Heather just ran home to get her purple jacket, such a small action that no one noticed, yet it opened a tragedy that lasted more than 30 years. The first lesson is very close to American families. Never underestimate those very short gaps. In just a few minutes, when Heather was out of sight, a man like Raymond Cole, who had quietly watched the neighborhood, marked the Whitmore backyard on a Temple map, chosen the exact spot with no dogs, no lights, exploited that gap to strike. The second lesson is the danger of silence. Timothy didn't directly kill Heather, but helping Cole place the clean backpack, burning evidence in warehouse number 15, and especially staying silent, for more than 2 decades, meant the Whitmore family had to wait until Heather's purple jacket and personal items were found in a storage unit in Arizona, and DNA confirmed the remains near Belton Lake, before knowing the truth. In today's America, where many people don't want to get involved, this story reminds us that not reporting, not speaking up about something wrong, is also a form of complicity. The third lesson is for the system: storage errors. The backpack logged in the wrong location, the warehouse checked with the wrong number, the 1997 letter, filed in miscellaneous show that just a little carelessness in records can steal decades of justice. In a society increasingly dependent on data and systems, the responsibility to work accurately, to respect every detail, from the officer filling out reports to the lab, analyzing DNA, and the forensic genealogy team, is not just professional skill, but a moral duty to the victims and their families. If you want to continue joining these journeys in search of the truth, like the Heather Whitmore case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue to shine light on mysteries that seem to have sunk into darkness.